Coming up on American Grift.
I've been trying to depict myself as a sensible, reasonable person as Nick as an extremist, so I guess I'll just
I'll just
go
Castro
for it.
right now. Socialism versus capitalism.
Take the land.
I think-
Shoot the kulaks.
No shooting, but I do think
No
that
shooting.
there's something...
They always say that.
Just simple re-education, that's it, you know?
Hey, if those
you ever watch
re-education camps are schools of choice, I'm there, okay?
After a few months of exploring the strange, absurd, and frequently depressing periphery of the American economy, from trailer park denizens to TikTok kids and NFT billionaires, we decided that we should take a step back, and rather than just looking at the faults within the system, look at the system itself. Is capitalism the way forward for the American economy? Or is it time to lurch towards a more socialist model? All sides of this debate agree on one thing. The current American economy looks pretty grim. So rather than wallow in that grimness, we invited two of our smartest, most entertaining, and ideologically opposite friends to a comedy club to argue about how to fix this mess.
I'm going to introduce these two guys. On one side, Nick Gillespie, the editor-at-large of Reason, which would be Reason.com, the magazine, the podcast, the whole kit and caboodle.
The Broadway musical.
The Broadway musical, and the author of the Declaration of Independence, right? And what's the subtitle? Something about how libertarians can solve the world?
How libertarian politics can fix what's wrong with America.
I don't know why you're clapping. They haven't fixed America. That book came out about 10 years ago. So,
As a matter of fact, we made it a little bit worse.
And Bhaskar Sunkara is the founding editor and publisher of Jacobin and the editor of the ABCs of Socialism and the Socialist Manifesto, The Case for Radical Politics in an Era of Extreme Inequality. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. So we have the two poles here, right? We have the man who says that socialism can solve our problems and the man who has lied to us and told us that libertarianism has solved our problems.
I think so, yeah.
Nick?
It's not a problem if you ignore it. Politics, it's like cancer. If you just don't go to the doctor,
This
you got
is
nothing to worry about.
Yeah, this is not going to go well, just so you guys know.
Yeah.
So I was looking at the Washington Post the other day, and I came across an old piece. It's a news piece, not an editorial. And the headline was "The Crisis in Capitalism." If one puts that in quotation marks and searches the internet, literally every publication has done some iteration of this over the past 10 years.
Right.
Is the premise right? Are we in right now, or have we been in the past decade, in a crisis of capitalism?
Well, it's interesting because the last decade, from like about 2009, February or something in 2009 to 2020, we had the longest economic expansion in American history. So if that's maybe that's the crisis, that everybody's getting rich or something like that. I think we're not in a crisis of capitalism. The main problems in America are the places where we don't have enough capitalism. Capitalism works pretty well. I'm sure we're going to talk about housing. When you allow supply to grow to meet demand, housing prices come down, services get better, et cetera. When you look at the places that are most fucked up, it's things like education, where there's 90% of the schools are run by the state. Healthcare, where more than 50% of healthcare dollars are paid for by the state. Retirement, which gets screwed up because of things like that. So if we have a crisis of capitalism, I would say it's that we don't have enough.
The salient thing for me is that even when capitalism is growing and things are going well, when there's productivity gains and things like that, we're in a situation where the vast majority of those gains are going to the owners of capital, and relatively less of those gains are going to workers compared to, let's say, in the post-war period when we had stronger unions, we had state policies to facilitate more of a share going to working class people. Quantitatively, because there is so much wealth in society, we've been building more and more wealth since, let's say, the 60s, since this like golden age of capitalism that people across the political spectrum kind of harken back to, that a lot of people are better off now than they would have been in the past. The question, though, is if you have this wealthy society that's been built off this socially created wealth, if you have all these productivity gains, then why are we only marginally better off, your average American, instead of before? But you have to compare us to other countries. The UK and the US are less mobile than countries like Denmark, Finland, Norway, or even Canada, which is not a social democratic country. So why is that? I think a lot has to do with the decline of unions and the kind of working class power in civil society.
The one thing that does seem uniform to me is something that both of you seem to acknowledge, and it's something that I've seen going out and talking to people. Everyone feels this way, right? I mean, the Republican Party turned on a dime that was a party of free markets and discussing free market solutions to things, to almost totally abandoning that in becoming a Make America Great Again. You're being set upon by these rich people, attacking Wall Street, which was never a thing that the Republican Party did so consistently as they've done under Trump. Why is it that people feel this way?
For the Republican Party, a party that's trying to win elections, someone like Trump, I think, pursued an agenda very similar to a lot of mainstream Republican agendas, but he tied it in with trying to speak politically to some of the anger in places in the Rust Belt, and you need to get people behind your ideas. So, for example, some of Trump's tariffs were smart, even though they were bad at the policy level, because it was a signal to people saying, I'm on your side, I'm doing something for you.
We lose a fortune on trade. The United States loses with everybody.
The European Union is brutal to the United States. They don't take, and they understand that, they know it.
You have to create a narrative that tells people that you are a hardworking person, you want to show up and work and take care of yourself and your family, and you are the protagonist in this story of rebuilding and regrowth.
Industrialization, like the industrial sector of the economy, peaked at about 40% in 1943. And since then, if you look at the charts, it's been a straight line decline. And I'm 58. I've been through at least 4 or 5 cycles where people talk about the deindustrialization of America. I went to grad school in Buffalo in the early 90s, and people were talking about, I don't know what happened, the jobs just left. And they were talking about it as if it had happened in 1989. Those jobs had fled a long time ago, but we tell this story of everything was good until globalization, everything was good until this, until that. And I think if we look and we're more honest about that kind of stuff, we would realize that the deindustrialization of America is good. We make more stuff with fewer things. What we need to do is create an economy where the people whose jobs get put out, they just disappear. Who runs photomat booths anymore? That's gone, right? Dry cleaning is on the way out. How do we create an economy where those people can shift into what's coming next? And this is one of the big failings of government and of politics. I don't know that they can do that, that there are effective. The government runs dozens of job retraining programs that they don't even track the effectiveness of because they don't work.
For reasons you described, deindustrialization is actually a misnomer in the fact that the U.S. is producing more cars than ever. Right, the share of employment in manufacturing is declining, but you're diagnosing the problem, but you had the conclusion right there in the palm of your hand, but because of your ideological background, you had to back away from it, which is simply state active labor market policies, which is if you have you could have a dynamic economy. We're higher levels at the height of Nordic social democracy. In a country like Sweden, there was more firm failure than in America. But the effects of firm failure were felt less by the working class people that were losing their jobs because there was effective state policy for retraining.
What's the state policy that that would help people in Buffalo?
So
other than bus tickets to anywhere outside of Buffalo. And I don't mean that. I don't mean that as a cheap joke. The way the story gets told, it's always Detroit. Detroit peaked in 1950. In terms of population and stuff like that. It's over for Detroit. Maybe it can remake itself, but a lot of people have already left. and we got to figure out how to get them to the
So,
places
Bhaskar,
where the
what-
jobs are.
When you hear people on your own side of the ledger say things like late capitalism, crisis of capitalism, what do you make of that?
So the term actually was first pioneered by this Belgian Marxist Ernest Mandel. This will definitely not make the final cut.
Yeah. This is leading the cut right now.
And you know,
and
this
is-
Vice Moynihan is big in Belgium.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you do realize that this is like the producers. We're all trying to get fired right now, so
Right.
we'll start with that.
For Mandel, what he was trying to do was just to say, okay, the three phases of capitalism. There was the initial, very competitive, small-scale phase, and there was industrial capitalism. Then now I'm in this post-war moment. How do I explain the growing internationalization and shifts in capitalism? But I think people have used it as like a pejorative term, saying we're leading to crisis, in part because people see...
But are we?
I mean, there's an ecological crisis looming, but I think in general, it's a better bet to say that a system can adapt and change and survive rather than to predict its downfall. To me, going beyond capitalism or building a better society is fundamentally a political choice rather than something that's destined to come.
We have a social welfare net, and it gets a lot of things done. I'm a libertarian. I'm not an anarchist, so I'm not opposed to taxes, and I'm not opposed to certain types of transfer payments. I suspect that we might agree. I mean, I would like to see, for instance, social welfare spending, instead of taking a bunch of money from everybody and then saying, okay, Bhaskar, here's a voucher for housing, here's a voucher for healthcare, here's a voucher for certain foods in the grocery store, just give people money, like give them unrestricted cash transfers. And I think that would make the system easier to administer, and it would also allow people, it would give them dignity and the ability to kind of fix their lives, and they know better.
Let's talk about something like the pandemic, right? That's a huge government intervention into the economy, just giving out cash, et cetera. Was that a good thing? And if you look back, were we a little too heavy breathing about what the Obama administration did in those interventions before?
No, I mean, I think that, and it wasn't just Obama, it was George Bush as well. When you look at like the TARP program and the auto bailout, which started under Bush, these were bad policies that did not have intended effects, and they just kind of papered over things, added to national debt. You know, I believe, and there's a bunch of both right-wing and Marxist economists at the University of Massachusetts who have demonstrated that having large national debts over time where there's no pretense that you're going to reduce them harms long-term economic growth. When we get to the pandemic, you know, in 2019, the federal budget was $4.4 trillion, a record. The next 2 years, it was $6.4 and $6.8 trillion. Like, we have massively increased the size, scope, and spending of government. The economic import of it is, you know, we have pumped so much money into the economy, including telling people, giving people money not to work, which slows things down. It's, you know, it is not a surprise that right now we're in an inflationary period. You'll notice that all of the people are like, oh, it's transitory inflation. It's going to clear up in a couple months. Now it's a couple of years, and I think it's going to be, you know, a real tough slog.
In the case of GM and the auto bailouts, I think they were necessary for many reasons. I think that was a case where the state intervention preserved a lot of employment, and in America, employment is tied to your health care. So there's a lot of like ramifications that could have stemmed from that that were far greater than the loss of just of some temporary government money going in.
So is there a size thing when the government should intervene and save an industry?
I think it's a question of policy, case by case. I think there's reasons why states all around the world sometimes shelter certain industries, and also for what it's worth, I think American Auto would be a lot better off if they didn't have to pay for their workers' health insurance. And I'm not suggesting that the UAW take a cut to their health insurance, but in other countries, they're competing against Korean and German and Japanese auto manufacturers that have government-run health insurance. So the burden is less on those industries to begin with, and also that means that the price for allowing these firms to fail would also be a lot less too.
Let's talk a little bit about housing. If you look at a place like New York City, San Francisco, et cetera, major metropolitan areas, it's the highest housing prices in the world, right? Or in the country, some of them. What is the government to do about something like that, if anything?
I've been trying and mostly failing at trying to depict myself as a sensible, reasonable person, as Nick as an extremist. So I guess I'll just
I'll just
go
Castro
for it.
right now.
I think
Take the land.
I think
Shoot the kulaks.
No shooting. But I do think that there's something really.
They always say that.
Just simple re-education. That's it.
And, if those
you ever watch
re-education camps are schools of choice, I'm there. Okay.
School choice for re-education camps.
No, but I am for the state building far more well-funded, well-maintained public housing.
Yeah.
In my favorite example, in Sweden from the 1960s and 70s, 1 million homes were built in a country at the time of 8 million people. Now, what that would do is essentially create a greater public option for housing. It would ease the rental markets. It would not have the same sort of distortion effects that sometimes libertarians correctly point out, that sometimes badly constructed policies around rent controls could have.
Housing costs in Stockholm are out of control. I mean, they're crazy right now, and particularly it's very difficult to get an apartment in Stockholm.
Well, we're talking about, I imagine that the housing crisis would be a lot greater if there was 1 million less units of supply in the country. But I think there is a truth to the idea that one important solution to the housing problem is generating more supply. The question is whether we could just wait for the free market to generate supply that is going to help working class people, as opposed to right now, you loosen restrictions and regulations, you create more of an incentive for people to create housing. That's going to have some net benefit effects, but it's going to take longer to take effect.
Than building housing, public housing units.
We should have we should have more public housing. Public housing works quite well in Singapore and a lot of other countries where you invested. This is the kind of
but it doesn't work well in America. What happens, and here's an instructive case. This is where I think if we had more capitalism in housing, we would have better housing, more housing, and cheaper prices. A couple of years ago, Tokyo was the most expensive city in the world to live in, and for a variety of reasons, the Japanese government actually loosened up, all the regulations on it. Tokyo created 150,000 new housing starts in 2018, which was more than New York, LA, Houston, and I think San Francisco combined. Tokyo is now a relatively cheap city to live in because there's more housing. That gets done through the free market if it's allowed to. In places like San Francisco, New York, LA, nobody can build housing at scale anymore. The best way to do it is to relax land use regulations and allow developers to build bigger, taller, and more stuff. That's the solution.
I'm not in favor of brownstone preservation and existing zoning requirements. What I am in favor, though, of is having the state play a role constructing housing for people near to where they work, well-maintained, affordable housing.
Nick, I know what you think the government shouldn't do, right? What should the government actually do proactively for poor people when it comes to housing?
I think that all transfer programs should be in the form of unrestricted cash grants, because then you just, instead of Section 8 housing, which is like government financed housing, it carries a stigma with it and things like that. If you gave people, if the poverty level is, $13,000, for an individual or something like that, if you gave them that in cash, rather than saying we're going to parcel out, here's some food stamps, here's this, here's that, I think they would make the best decisions with those dollars.
I'm for a welfare state that has less conditions, and giving cash is one way to do that. So there's no real point of disagreement there. What I would say is that in general, Nick can say those sensible things, but broadly, the libertarian world allies themselves with politicians and with large business interests that advocate against the politics of redistribution. So I think that's the political aspect that we have to take aside for these policy debates. Who is the coalition that can build a better constructed welfare state, even if it's just in your vision for people on the margins of society? That coalition that's built welfare states all around the world, some poorly constructed, some better constructed, have been labor unions, and it has been forces of the left.
a brief digression on something that is kind of funny to me, because we filmed 2 episodes about cryptocurrency, NFTs, things like this. The metaverse, which I still don't know what that is. It's just having an avatar of yourself, as far as I can tell.
It's very exciting.
It's very exciting. The one thing I found pretty interesting about it at this NFT conference was that there are people that were avowed socialists that I spoke to, and the usual kind of libertarian types.
So it was a really good-looking crowd.
It was a great-looking crowd.
Yeah, both sides.
It was not socially awkward in any way.
No.
And both of them have different kind of enthusiasms for something that essentially cuts the government out of monetary policy. What do you, Bhaskar, make of this, and how does that kind of slot into your worldview? Because I've seen people on your side say this is great, but for different reasons than what the kind of libertarian side says.
Well, the good thing about being a socialist in America in 2021 is that it's a lot less lonely than being a socialist in America in like 2006, 2007. The bad thing is obviously you have people saying all sorts of stuff who identify as socialists. So I would say that the utility of cryptocurrency is primarily to either have more privacy for legal transactions or for black market activities. Also, it's a tool of speculation. So if you could buy dips, and you could set your phone to alert Elon Musk whenever he boosts up something, and then immediately go and buy it and then sell it. And I think a lot of the talk about the utility of cryptocurrency is just a way to maintain the bubble. Maintain the bubble for a little bit longer. Hey, no, this thing actually has intrinsic value. It has this value, that value. There are more stable forms of currency that people can use that have a far lower transaction cost, like the British pound or the American dollar.
Nick, you're a bit more bullish on this.
I like Bitcoin in particular, but crypto more generally, and I see it less as it's not a speculative thing. In the short term, a lot of people are making bets and trying to make money and things like that. But I went to the big Bitcoin conference in Miami in June, and what was fascinating is that the people there were not talking about it like, okay, here's we're going to pump up Dogecoin and become Dogecoin billionaires and then sell it and all of that kind of stuff. It was primarily about creating this alternative system that allows people to conduct their business the way that they want to. There's a guy named Alex Gladstein at the Human Rights Foundation who talks about Bitcoin as a way of people in authoritarian countries, Venezuela, Iran, China, to buy and sell things and get stuff. I mean, people in Venezuela Venezuela subsidized electricity so heavily because it's an oil-producing country. They had massive Bitcoin mining there, and the people would, they would send Bitcoin out of the country and have people send back stuff from Amazon to it. It's a way of getting around authoritarian governments. It allows a currency to circulate independent of central banking. I think that's great. Countries can't fool around with their currency as much, and Bitcoin is a great way of talking about that.
You said something was interesting about how it's less lonely to be a socialist in 2021 than it was in 2012. For a lot of people, particularly in the media class, it looks as if the world is going your way, that people are on your side, that the Democratic Party, Joe Biden has lurched to the left in a lot of ways. AOC and the Squad get a lot of attention. The Republican Party is certainly talking about populism. Is the world going your way? I mean, is America becoming more friendly towards socialists, which it wasn't certainly in the past?
Well, no is a short answer. But I think the longer answer is that it's the norm in advanced capitalist democracies to have a strong socialist current and to have strong socialist and civil society. It's a norm to have Marx taught in academia, even in econ departments. Actually, a lot of econ departments are in other countries still called the old name, departments of political economy. Why in this moment are people talking about socialism rather than a form of left populism like with Podemos and other countries? I think a lot has to do with the randomness of Bernie Sanders being an old lefty who got politicized in the Socialist Party of America's youth wing.
Yeah. But it's not, the Bernie thing is not a sort of one-off, is it? I mean, he's an amazingly popular figure amongst people in the Democratic Party. I mean, he obviously almost won the nomination a couple of times. What happened? Do you think that's just a fluke?
There's something, I think, true and simplistic about the Bernie Sanders appeal.
Are you ready for a radical idea? All right, together we are going to create an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. Very proud that our campaign does not have a super PAC.
Which is telling people, you work hard and you're not getting enough. And there are people who are getting what you deserve. There are millionaires and billionaires. There's some eternal truths to the appeal of class struggle.
Every billionaire is a policy failure, right?
I mean,
that was AOC's chief of staff said that. And it's like, when I hear that, I'm thinking, like, what would the pandemic have been like if Jeff Bezos, that billionaire policy failure, had not created Amazon? We would have had, as bad as it has been, it would have been unlivable.
What would the world be without Jeff Bezos? Well, there'll probably be a lot of other smaller firms creating employment and workers at those firms helping to create value as well. Like,
there wouldn't have been people bringing, the same day when I need, a ketamine infusion, and they'll be like, we're going to get it there. It's same day delivery.
Yeah.
I think there's an old school kind of socialist talking point, which is that all capitalists are parasites, which is a very hard position, I think doesn't really make that much sense. The question is, can we do better? Can we create a better system? It's not in absolute terms whether it's better to have the status quo of an economy dominated by a handful of powerful people versus an economy where nothing is produced and we're just starving and poor forever. When it comes to the realm of politics, and also when it comes to the firms in which wealth is constructed, ordinary workers are still relatively replaceable. Now, Nick, with you at Reason, I'm sure you're not
I get told my annual review, it's like, you are eminently replaceable.
If you had, let's say, upper management or something like that, maybe not you, but someone else like you at Reason, can actually go to a meeting with your boss and say, I deserve 10% more, I have some sort of leverage, I have this skill, I have this whatever. They can negotiate as individuals, yes, or that photo. If you're a worker at CVS and you go and say, hey, I'm earning $12.50 an hour, I want to earn $15, $16 an hour, as an individual worker, your boss will probably tell you to F off, right? But if you go with the rest of your workforce and you make that demand, then collectively you might be able to make that happen because you have a threat of slowing down or stopping production. But that's the collective logic that works at a firm, and that's the reason why we need unions at firms. But that's also the collective logic of why broadly working class people need political parties and need institutions to actually say, yes, we as a collective have a common interest, and these other people have a different interest. Let's say you, as an owner of private property, Nick, decide to build a factory, and you make this investment and whatever else, and you convince 100 other people to work at your factory, your restaurant, or whatever else, on terms of $14 an hour wage and 10-hour shifts, but everyone's really happy there and they like it. Then the government comes about, where a political party pushes the message of, we're going to demand that everybody gets paid $15 an hour, but 8-hour day maximums or whatever else. So for the ordinary workers at that firm, they're now getting more freedom. They're getting 2 hours extra a day. They could do whatever they want. They could speculate in cryptocurrency. They could bet on the Knicks. They could, I don't know, like what normal people do, like watch TV, read I don't know what normal people do,
They read poetry, yes.
Read poetry, right.
Yeah.
And they
as a representative of the worker, you shouldn't say, I don't know what ordinary people do.
Well, I would say I don't know what ordinary people do, because there is no real people are incredibly weird and eclectic, whatever, which is why the state should stay out of civil society.
There's nothing in libertarian philosophy or ideology that precludes collective bargaining or forming unions. If the government comes in and just arbitrarily sets the wage rate at $20 an hour, and the company is barely getting by, you're not going to keep the same number of workers. It's not a costless intervention, and it's not just like, oh, we can pull all of this money out of the profits that the swells on.
So it is true that for our version in our country, a higher minimum wage would encourage firm failure of certain less efficient producers. But if less efficient producers collapse and more efficient producers expand, that's good for productivity, that's good for the economy. And if you're the right set of active labor market policies, then it's a net benefit. I mean, firm failure is not a bad thing. If you can't afford to pay your workers a living wage, it might be better.
The market kind of is the thing that sorts that out. Good firms versus bad firms, or efficient firms versus inefficient firms. And I will point out the companies that push for minimum wage now, it's places like Walmart, it's places like Amazon, because they are using the power of the government to kind of price out their competition. Firms, businesses, one of the first things they do after they get big and successful is they buy government regulation that helps them maintain their market position and screw over competitors. And that's happening now in big tech. Facebook is running ads saying, we want to be regulated. We need to be regulated. It's time to be regulated, because they know they're going to write the regulations in a way that there will not be any more competitors to Facebook.
If you had the sort of dictatorial power, actually, I don't know what to say that. The socialists with the dictatorial power sometimes ends poorly. But if you had dictatorial power, right, and you say, I need to correct where this economy is going, where this culture is going, and you have this sort of lay of the land, I can say, I'm going to implement X, policies, whatever it be. What is the main concern for you, and how does one fix it, sort of wave of the wand?
So when it comes to my wider dreams of being a socialist, I believe that ordinary people are capable of running their own workforces, electing their own management. I think we'll always need divisions of labor. We'll always need firm failures. I believe that the market is necessary for both price calculations and also incentives. But I believe there's certain spheres of life, like, for instance, healthcare, in which we don't want to leave it to the market. And we see effective models. You could say that, hey, I prefer the American system to the British system. But the British system works in its own way. And I think the flaws in the British system could be corrected by policies. The American system, to me, seems like the worst of both worlds, where you're subsidizing a failing system that has this mix of public and private in a very incoherent way. I think there's a real solution that can be found in a more social democratic direction in America. If capitalists control the flow of investment, at some point capitalists can just say, no, the gig is up. We're going to stop investing because the system doesn't make sense, and we'd prefer to be in a situation similar to our peers in Britain and the United States. So I think fundamentally we have to grapple with the need to collectivize that sources of investment, precisely because capitalists are not parasites. So we need to take control of the things capitalists do productively in some way. That's why I think we need to go beyond social democracy. But the quest for my lifetime in the United States, I think, is getting people access to free and affordable healthcare.
Nick?
What I would argue is we're moving in many ways to a better society where when you look at broad social movements, and this is things like equality of all individuals, on racial terms, on ethnic terms, on gender, sexual orientation, we're moving in the right direction. That's good. I think we're becoming more adult about things like drug legalization and letting people choose their intoxicants. I think the key things that we need to do with the federal government is reduce its size, scope, and spending, which has blown up enormously over the past 20 years in particular. And we need to, the government, we can't pay for this. The debt that we accrue for that is slowing down economic growth. It comes with a lot of regulations that clog up the ability of creative destruction of an innovative economy to change so it's supplying the demands of people that change over time and things like that. We've been living in what I call the long 20th century, which starts with Bismarck's Germany, and it's the social welfare state. It is no longer viable in a world where population growth is shrinking, where the fertility rates are down. All of these systems that are bankrupting America, and they're bankrupting countries all over the world, are based on the idea you'll have 10 or 20 people contributing to a system, per beneficiary. That's no longer the case. We need to radically change that and say we want a government that keeps peace, does a couple of things, for the common good, and then it helps people who need help. And other than that, kind of get out of the way, and let's see what we develop.
Well, thank you, guys. That was the hardest hour of my life to not jump in and say things. So what we're going to do now is if anybody has any questions, if you can come up here, and, well, there you go.
What are the cultural norms or things that we should ask? What are the ethical obligations of capitalists to create a more fair society?
I think they have none. The role of businesses and capitalists is to maximize profit. That's what they should do. That's what they're built to do.
It's Milton Friedman. Ladies and gentlemen,
that's
Socialist Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
It's the role of the state to regulate capitalists, and it's the role of unions to demand that workers get more share of production, more share of that wealth. But in other words, there's nothing I hate more. Sorry, this is not an attack on you, but there's nothing I hate more than ethically conscious capitalists. No, just be capitalist. Let us regulate and admonish you and collectively bargain against you. But it's just the most insufferable trend I think of the last. How can Goldman, Sachs help bridge the racial wealth gap? It's the worst thing in culture in the past 10 years.
Reason in 2005 staged a debate between Milton Friedman and John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, who pushes a whole kind of conscious capitalism. And I think one of the things that some capitalists do, and you can argue about it, whether or not it's just a way of building more into the bottom line or not, but Whole Foods is a great example where it's not an employee-owned or run company, but the people who work there are really incentivized to be more productive. They get the extra money that they bring into the company. A lot of it goes to them. Whole Foods is always integrated into its local communities. And, that's a model. I don't think you need, one of the things that we should also think about, in a free society, you're going to have a lot of different models. And there will be the capitalists who are my only interest is maximizing shareholder value. But then you have other people who have a social mission. I think that's becoming more and more the case, partly because we have entered a post-scarcity world. We're not living there. And so all we're doing is more and more kind of symbolic value. And, it is a value when you are, the Hard Rock Cafe, we're going to save the planet. So every time you're rolling craps, it's look at me, I'm saving the planet. People pay extra for that, and that they can do that.
So capitalists don't have to just be ruthless profit maximizers.
But you want them.
Wait, no. The constraint is will it put me out of business? So you could cut your bottom line a little percentage as long as you're not being undercut by competitors. So it's just kind of a ridiculous thing when every little company needs to tell you it has a social purpose. When that's not the way our system is built. Our system is built in a not immoral sense, but in an amoral sense, on the generation of profits, on the accumulation of surplus. It's not built on gender equity.
Yeah,
I'll
give you
Sachs.
this. Raytheon, the defense contractor, was proud during Pride Week. They were Raytheon supports LGBTQ plus things, and it's that's
it also supports the Saudi royal family.
Exactly. They're
and putting me into college because my father worked for Raytheon.
Their weapons will kill you all, regardless of your gender or sexual orientation.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what your
they're
pronouns
very,
are; they will murder
nice
you. Let me go here first. Yeah.
Well, I feel like there was a lot of effort here in this debate to appear sane and find some common ground. So I was curious, maybe each of you could say your most extreme view that might not be popular.
Bhaskar, Nick. Give me your extreme positions.
Well, I already laid it out, which is worker ownership of the means of production. We've had classes. We've been a class society since the Neolithic Revolution. So that's a pretty big shift.
Yeah, I was hoping to say I love Stalin or something like that. To really shock everyone. huge Stalin fan. Nick, I know you're going to tell me about like heroin for 12-year-olds, but go ahead.
Yeah, but I want heroin in vending machines in charter schools. That's pretty much it. Well, and actually, oftentimes this used to drive my liberal friends insane when I would say, like, all welfare should be in the form of unrestricted cash grants. And then they would be like, are you kidding? Because poor people are going to, they'll spend food stamps on cigarettes, et cetera. But the drug legalization thing, it's like, I think all drugs should be legal. And I also think that the prescription regime should be abolished because that arrogates a huge amount of power to pharmaceutical companies, to doctors, to pharmacies that then get to control things in a way that I find extremely unhealthy.
What are your thoughts on internalized capitalism, the prioritization of work over well-being and its links to the increase in mental health issues in America?
Nick, why don't we start with you on that? It's a common criticism of capitalism that it prioritizes profit over the well-being of its workers. Is that something that you are concerned about?
Well, one thing that I'll say that is a real shift is that over the past few decades, I think people have been, I wouldn't call it internalized capitalism, but people are demanding that their work express their deepest commitments, their values, their morals, their mission, things like that. And that is probably one of the reasons why millennials and Gen Z have a lower labor force participation rate than boomers. People over 55 are actually working more than they were 20 years ago. People under 35 are working less, in labor force participation rates. I think it's a good thing that people demand or want their job to express who they are, and but it also, it's really difficult to find those jobs, and it's also it raises the stakes on everything. We have become a world, again, I think we're in a largely symbolic economy now. You want everything you do to reflect your deepest commitments, and that is exhausting. It's hard to maintain consistency in that. And I think that may be leading to some kinds of mental health issues, or more broadly speaking, I think the thing that is upon us is actually a kind of crisis of meaning in our lives, because we have so many choices, which is good, but then it's kind of hard to pick one and go with it and maintain it, over time.
Yeah, I would agree that work or politics can't solve every existential problem that people have. I think that one of the core demands in history of the labor movement has always been freedom from production. Freedom, the 8-hour day was a galvanizing demand of the international labor movement. It wasn't for more meaning at work, it was just for less work, a more reasonable time spent at work. 8 hours to work, 8 hours to sleep, 8 hours to do whatever you want in life. And I think that we need to advocate something like that. I think also a lot of people find meaning in work. That's one reason why I'm skeptical about a universal basic income, even though I agree that a lot of welfare payments and so on would be better as cash. I think people do want to feel like they have a stake in society and don't just want to be at the mercy of the government or politics or whatever else and just be on a dole.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, comrades, compañeros, socialists and capitalists, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
I'm Michael Learmonth, editor-in-chief of Vice News. Too often, traditional news outlets shy away from the real stories and experiences of those living through global conflicts. Not Vice News. Our reporters are on the ground, fearlessly covering the human stories that shape our world. You and millions of others can continue to read, watch, and listen to Vice News for free. but we hope you'll consider making a one-time or ongoing contribution of any size at vice.com/contribute. Every contribution, no matter how big or small, helps support the journalism Vice News brings to you every day. Thank you.